Thank you again for joining us on another one of our calls in this Tuesday morning. My name is Peyton Richardson. I am Data Officer here at Eastside Pathways. I am obviously not Stephanie Sherrington. Our Executive Director, she can't be with us today. But I do want to introduce the team. I'll also introduce Sandy Nathan, one of our awesome community impact managers who also was called away to another call this morning. So we have the backbone staff in the distilled version today. But I would just want to quickly introduce us. Obviously, Stephanie is our Executive Director, and Sandy Nathan is one of our community impact managers. I want to introduce Kalika Curry, who will be leading us through our work today as a community impact manager, and Vicky Yu, who's our business and operations manager, who's kind of seamlessly running the logistics behind the scenes and moving us into breakout sessions. So again, that is a little bit about us and who we are, and thank you again for for joining us here. And you've obviously been on these calls or some Zoom calls or a team call or a Skype call, so you're all pros in video call logistics and etiquette. So I'm not going to go through all of these. The big things are, if you're new, please do add your name, organization, email affiliation to the chat, or even if you're not new, please add your name and affiliation to the chat. I think it's great as this work continues within these calls, outside of these calls, to make sure that we have a good roster for folks to be able to look at once we send out the chat, so people can really speak to one another. And we're not doing any affinity fishbowls in this current chat, in this call, excuse me. So the call will be recorded and we will be sending it out. Additionally, we will also be recording and sending out the chat transcript for folks to be able to connect and maybe look at any resources that you may drop in the chat. So again, those are really the main changes kind of as we move through today. And again, just thank you so much for being here. One thing that we want to make sure to do is welcome you all. And as we begin to trickle in, I want to move us into our gracious space. Again, this is really a setting to ground us. Each week we do take time to make sure that we have the moments and the time to really get our heads in the space that we're going to be working in today. So, I want us to consider, kind of a space of curiosity and exploration. The Backbone team was talking yesterday about, a lot of the things that we're all working through and that we're all carrying with us. And, much like these two kids and their pretty neat hats, we really do stay in a space of kind of curiosity and exploration. As children, as adolescents, as adults, this has been or is the way of being in the world, learning new things and making new connections and considering different views and kind of just adding them to your tool belt for life. And as you continue to move through the world, it's incredibly important. And as many folks here are, and I am as one, as a parent, I want to expand my daughter's universe and challenge and support with new experiences and perspectives and new faces and different sights and different sounds. And that is part of my role and part of all of our roles as parents and caregivers and caretakers, is to bring in different perspectives, to introduce and expand the universe of those in our care. And as adults, it's really up to us individually oftentimes to invite and hold, challenges and wonder and kind of bring new perspectives in. So the personal reflection on the slide really speaks to, what I want you all to get your heads into, like what story or whose story, aside from your own, acknowledging that each of our stories are incredibly unique, powerful, and vibrant. But aside from that story, what or whose story do you keep in mind as you move through the world? Just kind of think about that a little bit. And before we move into breakout groups with our specific question, just, and you can feel free to jot that down, speak it out, type it in the chat. But that's just a place where I want you all to really think about, like, whose perspective, whose story are you bringing with you as you continue to move through the world? And before we go into our breakout groups, the question here is really, what new perspective or perspectives have influenced your actions or your reactions? So taking that personal reflection of what stories are you bringing with you, and like honing in on what perspectives really have influenced your actions, your reactions. I know that for me, you know, having a young daughter really has, you know, not changed me per se, but it's a perspective that I bring in every single interaction that I have, trying to make the world a little bit better and be able to see the world through little eyes, and everything from making sure that there are no cords on the floor to making sure that I can build a world that's a little bit more equitable every day for those that are coming after us. So in the chat here, we have put in the gracious space questions, both the personal reflection and the group. And right now, Vicki is going to transport us all into a breakout group to kind of discuss that question. I believe you have around 5 minutes. So Vicki, do your magic, and we will see you back here in about 5 minutes to share out some of those perspectives that are influencing your actions or reactions. I believe we're all back. Welcome back. Hopefully you were able to spend a little time thinking about both the personal reflection about whose story that you bring with you and what specific perspectives have influenced kind of your actions or reactions. So I want to give folks an opportunity to either in the chat or to unmute yourself and just share, Kalik was just sharing, just share anything that really came up around what new perspectives you have that have influenced your actions or your reactions. Yeah.
This is Sue Baugh. I just give a quick one. I was saying that social justice is kind of a thing that's been in me and my whole family. But recently I watched the show on PBS called The Vote, and it's about how women got the vote. Don't ever let them tell you somebody gave you the vote. Nobody gave it to them. It took 70 years, and they hung in. And so you have to hang in to make a difference.
Wow. Hi, it's Tammy. I was thinking about my personal reflection is one from last week meeting and hearing the story of Gloria Henderson and working with her, and it's helped me to move forward in what I'm doing in my work feeding people through Nourishing Networks and her perspective. And then just in gracious space, I met Lita from the University of Washington working with North Shore. So this gracious space has been really important for me today. Shout out to Gloria and Lita right now.
And I'll just jump in real quick and say, I think what's been very valuable for me for the new perspectives were the affinity fishbowls that have been part of these meetings the past 4 to 6 weeks. I've really gained several new perspectives listening to the fishbowls, and I appreciate the Eastside Pathways provided those opportunities.
I will jump in here since we're sharing and say that, to echo what Chris said, I think the affinity fishbowls have been incredibly useful and just affirming. And also one of the things that I have recognized is taking stock of, I think, my positionality. So the perspective that have influenced my actions are just the ways that that my positionality impacts the world. So making sure that I can walk through the world in a way that's gentle and also be an ally. Recognize that I can't hope and demand for allyship from other people if I am not actually fulfilling that. And for instance, this is a very specific example. I was having a conversation with someone about some polling numbers that came out around the election, and which demographic groups voted for whom. And I was getting into an argument about this looks ridiculous and this looks, and my wife, who is Asian, came up to me and said, "This is wonderful, and there are no percentages that represent Asian people anywhere on this graph." And I was embarrassed that I didn't actually advocate for her without her having to tell me, and recognizing that that is my personal growth, to recognize that I was so into, well, we need to make sure that we have representation for, Black people and folks of, folks who are Hispanic, and recognizing that my wife is Asian, and, she and her friends said, this is a graph and it's wonderful, but it actually eliminates a large segment of society. And so for me, recognizing that there's still a lot of work that I need to do, and continuing to open, as painful and as rough as it might be, my own perspective is really, really important. All right. So thank you everyone for sharing out. We are going to move forward, and if there are any lingering things you'd like to share, please do put those in the chat. Moving forward, we want to just talk a little bit about our results. But the one thing that I really wanted to touch on is that the work. It's okay that the work is hard, and we're going to talk about this today as we go through our results. It's also okay to get stuck. This work is sticky and messy, and it's going to get hard. Really, the only thing it's not okay to do is to not ask for some sort of guidance when you are stuck. You're going to get stuck. It might take a long time to get unstuck, but just know that we, the backbone, and each of you has unique positionality, unique gifts to bring to this work. And just because you're stuck doesn't mean that we're all stuck. And just because that someone else is stuck doesn't mean you can't help unstick them. And so the work in these calls, outside of these calls and beyond these calls, is a lot of it's just, at this point, we've worked to identify resources and identify needs, and those needs and resources grow and change. We recognize that, but as we get deep into the work, it's hard. And the system that we are trying to change is a system for a reason. It's not a ramshackle structure. It is a very, very established system, and getting stuck happens. But as we go through the results of being ready to work and doing the clearing and coaching, having our work time, and then going through our fish scale report outs, the backbone really wants to create an opportunity for us to clear what's getting us stuck, and to really work on helping each other get unstuck, offering advice and observations and kind of areas to unstick. I know that we were able to send out an article last week, I believe, about the theory of aligned contributions. And that is really a continued reference, as we look at all of the different factors that are going into the work that you are doing. It's a reminder that, there are, with so many moving parts, it's easy to get stuck, but with so many moving parts, it's easy to reach out and, ask for some help or ask for some guidance to clear some avenues. And again, that's really just a reminder that this is sticky work, and it's okay to be stuck, but we're going to try and help one another out. And I want to, again, move us forward and talk a little bit about working agreements. I'm going to invite the EP team to speak here, but we have, I want to check in before we get into our differentiated work. These working agreements that we've seen are things that we've talked about. We've made sure that you've seen again, and we want to continue to hold ourselves and one another to these working agreements. And before I hand it to Kalika, just one reminder for all of us is, how are we holding these working agreements in this container? How are you holding it for yourself, and how are you helping your fellow mates here in this container really support those working agreements. So I will give it to Kalika briefly to just speak on those working agreements.
Yeah, thanks, Peyton. And thank you all. Loving seeing an increase of numbers of folks on the call today. Just wanted to really touch upon a couple of these pieces as Peyton's been speaking about, and we've been talking about the last couple of weeks here. This is the most difficult part in doing this adaptive leadership work and getting from the known and moving and sticking to it long enough to get to the adaptive and finding that small test of change. So just really want to acknowledge that third bullet point there around centering those who are impacted. We have heard a lot about, quarantine and how that makes it really challenging to be in community. And then also recognizing the digital divide as well as the loosening of boundaries. So if everybody's just feeling a sense of duress and being maxed out and having a lot going on, but recognizing in order to do this work effectively and equitably, we really do have to center those who are impacted in this work and thinking about how do we protect time and go that extra mile to ensure that's happening. Also want to really hone in on that idea of checking for understanding in your differentiated work later on this afternoon, taking the time to make sure you're all on the same page, because ultimately that is the change that we're looking for. How you lead differently is what's going to make the difference in our community. And then lastly, thinking about addressing and disrupting any form of racism for ourselves, continuing to think about mental models. Heard earlier in the gracious space, there was a appreciation for those affinity spaces and thinking about how do you take that and really reflect on it and continue to ingest that information so we might continue to chip away at our implicit bias. Gonna move to the next slide. Thank you, Peyton. Last week, you all had some time. I know I wasn't here, but I heard it went really well to really think about and lift up and celebrate meeting results. A lot of times when we think about productivity, especially in our culture here in the United States, it's this idea of outputs and outcomes. Okay, now we've got 17 sandwiches made, but forgot to address the fact that going to the store and purchasing the bread and deciding what to make for lunch and taking the time to wash your hands, there's all these little steps that have to go before you get that sandwich, right? It's a silly example, but a lot of times it's those small steps that really don't get the credit that they deserve. So while it may feel like we haven't been productive working together, recognizing that showing up, having conversation, speaking truth, honoring and reflecting back, all of those things are forms of productivity. All of those things are results that we want to acknowledge. Really appreciate hearing some folks were able to really tease out the difference between a low impact result versus a high impact and thinking about how do you work in your groups to move further into that high action, high alignment when you're working together. Peyton, do you have anything you want to add to this one?
No, I think that I was really thankful last week on the call and continue to be thankful that you all were able to really map the meeting results to the specific things that are happening within your focus groups. And I think this is a continued learning, I think, for all of us, but it was really great to see so many of you do that really quick mapping of, okay, these are the specific events that we're taking, and these are how those events map to the results. So again, I think that there's continued work to be done, but there's like a fertile ground of we're already making those connections. So congrats.
Yeah, and I think if I may, that 2x2, right? That performance measure, it's been a while since we looked at it, but really recognizing by showing up in this space, that top right corner, right? Attending, engaging, doing the work together. The bottom left is the difference made. What's going to be different in the community because we are all here together, right? And one of the most powerful examples and experiences I had was in my leadership with the Leadership Eastside program, and had a couple police officers in their space. And I remember one of our coaches saying, what would it look like for you to develop the relationship so that before you pull out your gun, you think of that person who has a different worldview than you. Before you decide to execute on anything you do, you're able to do that. And I actually recently had a phone call with the chief of police for the city of Kirkland, and she shared with me that she got a call that sounded like a story that I had shared with her before, and she thought of me. And that was the greatest gift she could have ever given me, because that meant that she had humanized me and that we had the relationship that in a moment of crisis made her think about me and my kids and how she might lead differently. And so I just want to offer that truly it is the relationships and the conversations we have here that have the impact, right? And what happens out there is the evidence of the relationships in here. So just really wanted to celebrate all the time that you've been spending together in here. Okay, gonna move us on to the next slide here. So before we move into your differentiated work time, you'll note that most of our designs have been a lot of coaching and teaching and us doing a lot of the work alongside with you. But at this point, we really just want to give you the time to do the work together, right? A lot of times it's like, okay, you've got 25 minutes, get what you can get done. Today, the intention is giving you back the remaining of the meeting so that you can really start to get things gelled. Before we do that, wanting to take just a few minutes with you all to create some space to name how you're feeling, to get some coaching or feedback, or at least outside of your focus groups kind of process, this is what it's feeling and looking like. We as the backbone are fortunate to have relationships with each of you to have that dialogue, but wanting you to have an opportunity to have that cross conversation here. So feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, or use the chat box. But if there's anything you want to name, anything that you're struggling with, anything you want to lift up, now is the time to do that. I'm going to name one thing for you all. I know that you can see the number of participants on this call. Okay. I would say for the first 2 months, we were usually hanging around 60 to 70 people on these calls. Now we're at 36, and last week I believe we had 24. So that's definitely an elephant in the room, right? Seeing some heads nodding.
And following up on that, Kalika, I have to say, we're tackling really huge problems that definitely need to follow the framework in the article sent out last week. I mean, they just call out for that. But I'm concerned we don't have all the people at the table or the right people at the table. And I've noticed too from the fallout, some of the participants that were very valuable to make sure those voices are heard are not here anymore. So that concerned me too.
Thank you, Chris. Does anybody have any thoughts or feedback? And I prefer not hypotheses, right? Because we're not in the room, we don't want to make an assumption, but does anybody have any sense of like, Bjorn, I think I see your hand raised. Yeah. Any thoughts or feedback on why you think that is? Or Becky, sorry, thank you.
Sorry, I don't know why it signs in as my son every time, and I can't figure out why. Which leads, it's like every time, which leads me to, I think one of my wonderings is that I think my concern is that those of us doing this work also have a lot going on in our lives, and it's getting harder to show up because I'm overwhelmed. Even at home, I'm overwhelmed, and then the work is overwhelming. And so I think it's starting to get, the smaller the group, the more it's just personally getting difficult.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I was in a meeting the other day and it said Jacoby's mom. So, but I appreciate you naming capacity. Tammy, I see your hand just a moment here. Appreciate you naming capacity. And I just want to offer that the purpose of containers, one of the benefits of having groups or containers is the ability for people to move in and out of them, and the work still continues moves, right? That's the purpose of an institution. An institution holds culture and movement and products and processes, and you can hire and fire, you can take a vacation, but the work still keeps moving, right? So I just want to encourage you all and know that our first working agreement is prioritizing your breath, your wellness. And so if you need to step away so that you can be well, do that, right? But the purpose of having strong relationships is so that the work continues to move. One of the things is being able to name that for each other. Okay, Tammy.
With the Nourishing Networks Wednesday meetings, I've been also seeing a decline in the number of people who are able to attend. And the only thing that I can offer is the invite. And if you can make it, great. Just come on and hear what's happening in the community. But I have also noticed the same thing. And I know we're not supposed to form a hypothesis, but I agree with Becky. I think it's that people are trying to do all the work, and there's a lot of work to do, and it's hard.
Thank you. So I want to invite you to continue to have these conversations in your focus group. I am going to lay a little tea on us before we move on. I'm seeing some recognition for kind of like the culture and the influence and impact of school, right? If you work for the school, this may be your off season. If you have children that are in school, this may be a capacity issue because now your kids are at home. And at the same time, I want to recognize there is a consciousness around when people of color or people who are disproportionately represented or people who are not being effectively served come to these spaces because we need change, right? And I shared this with my team earlier. I am Black 365. I don't get to take the summer off. And I'm not saying that to say don't take good care of yourselves. However, I am trying to say, if you've heard the truth that's been shared in these affinity groups, that pain, that discomfort, those experiences, don't take the summer off. So we need to figure out what we can do to collectively work together so that the work continues, right? And that's a systems issue. Like, that's not a people in this room issue. That's the way that our world works issue. That's the way that systems work issue. So it's not that we're all going to solve for that right now and here, but I do need to speak that truth into this space because it's hard for me particularly to think about, gosh, like these issues aren't going away. And there's some fear in my gut that says, if equity isn't being addressed right now, when the school year starts again, nothing's going to look differently, right? So I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Helen, for that affirmation, because it does make my stomach a little wheezy to name that for us. So I just wanted to speak that into this room and recognize that I want you all to be well. And at the same time, how do we figure out to change the way that we work together so that the issues continue to be addressed in our community? So I'm going to move us on to the next slide. In preparation for your focus group time, wanted to name that you're not going to have facilitated breakout groups. One, first and foremost, there is not enough Peyton Klika to go around. Two, because we live and breathe this work and we recognize that that has a deep impact on how you do things, but ultimately this is your work, right? Like, I don't go with Tammy back to her desk and help her do all the phenomenal work she does it without me. So the idea is when you come back from your focus groups today, we're going to have about 20 minutes at the end of the call for each group just to share and report out what their summary of results is as of today. Don't go for perfect. The goal is really, how are you working together? And this graphic organizer is just a place to summarize the work that you've done together. You're going to have 3 minutes to walk through it, and I'm going to model that just a minute so it doesn't seem as scary. 1 minute for people to give you feedback in the chat, and the Backbone staff will be capturing and that emailing it out to you so your teams will have time to work with that data later. And then a minute to switch. Peyton, can we move on to the next slide, please? I'm going quick so you can get all your time back. So this looks a little bit scary, but I'm going to walk and talk us through it. This is the Equitable Results Series fish scale or graphic organizer. You've seen this several times. You do have a copy of this in the tools and resources folder in Google Drive, as well as a copy of it in your workbook today. Peyton will be dropping the link to that in the chat. You'll need to have that open for when you go to your focus groups. So I'm going to give you a silly example of what you might say when you come back. Actually, it's not that silly, it's pretty relevant, but in comparison to the dialogue you're having, it might be. So as we've been moving through these exercises that we've been facilitating, each of these had a goal in mind, a result in mind. That first and foremost, we asked you all to think about what's a focus area or a theme you might want to tackle. And that's how we got into housing, food, funding, remote living and learning, and wellness, right? That's how we got there. So you might have a universal population. In this example I've created, it's kids who eat lunch in whatever school district in the next coming school year. So you note that there's a population, a universal population, all kids who eat school lunch, and there's a time boundary during the next school year. So I need to solve for it by then, and I'm going to continue to execute that solution during that time window. Through some conversation in that focus group, you may have realized, you know what, we can provide lunch for all these kids, but we really need to be mindful and focused on kids who have food allergies, right? The way that we're going to measure that we are effective in doing that is for surveying and getting feedback that kids, teachers, and parents report that youth feel nourished and ready to learn. You note that there's this equity piece, right? We're not just asking the kids, we're also asking the parents and the teachers. We're getting multiple perspectives. And it's this idea that they're reporting back. So that's our northern star, that we know what we're doing is working. In your groups, you had conversations about factor analysis. Why do we even need to talk about whether or not these kids are having lunch? Well, we recognize that kids need food in order to be ready to learn. And when we were having conversations, we realized that there's kids with food allergies, and there's a large population, 18% will make up, that have nut allergies. So handing all these kids peanut butter and jelly sandwiches is not the move, right? We also in our groups may have had a conversation and said, you know what, I realize that some of these kids are also in free and reduced lunch, and that impacts who's having lunch and who's not. And lastly, one of the things we found out as we were talking to the community was some of these kids don't even go to the lunchroom. We're not really sure why, but at some point in time, we might want to consider that. Again, we had more conversations in your group, and your group may have decided, we've got it. We're going to do a small test for change. We're going to offer seed butter and jelly sandwiches that are free for all the kids. So I'm going to break that down for you. One, recognizing we're not starting and building a whole new lunchroom. We're not running out to get funding to build a new kitchen and hire new staff. It's really small. We're switching from peanut butter to seed butter. Small, tiny change, right? Tiny, tiny change. And we're going to make sure that it's free for everybody. Why? Because if it's accessible to all, like wheelchair or curve cuts, they're built for people with wheelchairs, but they also benefit people with strollers, kids on scooters, people on bikes. So that idea that it's something that was designed specifically for one group, but helps everybody, okay? And then when you get into how you execute that, that's that side section where it says tactics, programs, events, communication, policy change. You might have a policy change that says we no longer have peanut butter in the school building. You might send out flyers to all the families in different languages that say, hey, guess what? Now we're serving seed butter and jelly sandwiches for free for everybody. You might host an event where you do a tasting party for the kids and you say, hey, I know you grew up eating peanut butter, but we're going to switch to seed butter. We're going to taste a bunch of brands and let you decide which one you think is the best. So those are a bunch of examples of what execution might look like. The purpose really is for when you guys to come back to be able to read off. This is our population. This is our focus population. This is our Northern Star. These are the key factors. This is something we might go do about it. We know that every group is in a different place. You may not have all of this, but the purpose of the graphic organizer or the fish scale is to be able to capture and summarize that. So when you leave this call, you have one sheet that helps you talk about the work that you're doing in here to bring other people along. Because as Chris said at the top, we may not have all the people, we may not have the right people, and this graphic organizer makes it clear that you and your teammates are on the same page and you can take this work outside. So I'm gonna stop talking because I've done a lot. We're going to move you into your focus groups. If you haven't already, please click the link in the chat box to open your workbook. You're going to need that. Please be prepared to have someone who's willing to represent your group when we come back. Know that when you're in focus group, you can hit the need help button and one of us will join you. We will also be coming around to do some listening and observing and coaching as necessary. I don't see anybody who's raising their hand or anything in chat that seems alarming or curious, so we'll see you back in a little bit and don't hesitate to ask for help. Oh man, that was a lot. I'm telling you, I don't know if you get excited about this stuff, but I'm super excited. I had a lot of fun jumping in and observing and disrupting your conversation, so I apologize if you don't enjoy that, but I really do, and loved hearing all the conversations that you were having. And before we have report outs, I just want to, Erica, she's stretching, not raising her hand. It's like she really has something to say. That was a good stretch, Erica. I just want to acknowledge a couple things before we invite each group to share. Is the purpose of doing these things is to really own the results and celebrate the work that you're doing together. And one thing I wanted to tease out for you all is the value of multiple perspectives, the value of collective impact is being able to share information, understanding, impact, efficacy across sectors, right? Like if everybody was saying, gosh, nobody, I had someone say to me the other day, I really want to speak to people who have experienced incarceration on how to survive and manage living in quarantine. That blew my mind. being able to put those people as subject matter experts in a situation that I don't know how to personally navigate. Those people do. They have thrived and maybe not thrived, survived during that time. And they might be able to say, here's some things that I did to manage being confined in a small space for an extended period of time, right? So it's being able to link and share information with people who have experience in things that we don't. That might be the magic wand. The other thing is realizing there are things that cannot be solved in isolation, and that is the purpose of working together. So as you can see on your screen here, we're going to give each of your groups 3 minutes. Do not go for perfect, just go for sharing what you know or celebrating the wins that you've gotten in your workout time here together. You're going to have 3 minutes. We're going to have remote. My group, so to speak, go first. 3 minutes just to share that fish scale, that graphic organizer. Peyton, I don't know if we want to put that slide back up. I think it's the one before, so everybody has a visual. Might be distracting because the examples are on there, but can invite someone from the remote group just to share their results, their fish scale.
I will. So I was going to try to share my screen, but apparently I don't think I can. So for the remote living and learning, we really focused on learning. And the universal population was all students involved in distance learning. The focus population was children who are not engaging with the distance learning, and the core indicator of success would be increase the percentage of students engaging as reported by the districts. Oh, you have it up, great. Sorry, I just moved back to my browser so I could see it. And so there was a pretty good discussion around the impediments to it, the primary ones being access to internet and computers, and then the time and bandwidth for that access. Then distractions in the home, either like noise, not having a quiet place to focus, or for a lot of students, they might be caretakers for younger siblings. And then engagement, classes that actually hold attention. You know, they might be able to physically get on to a Zoom call, but then they mentally check out. They're physically present, but not actually doing the work. And then the social emotional part, relationships with, you know, for students with each other and with the adults in schools, and the marginalization for certain groups that occurs in that space. So for strategies, now, obviously, if we actually knew how to fix all of this, it wouldn't be a problem, but, you know, sort of the tech aspect of it, you know, provide hotspots and computers for every child that needs it. I know that Bellevue this spring attempted to do that and got close, I think. And then community support for technology, sort of, Benjamin had a really good description of like, you know, teaching sort of key people how to do it, and then how to teach the, you know, the access, and then sort of disseminate information that way, student to student perhaps, or through community partners. Flexibility in instruction, synchronous versus asynchronous options, physical space for students that's not in school, presumably through community partners, or however that would work. Teacher teams, whether like, you know, a first grader doesn't have to be with their specific teacher. Can they listen to a different teacher if the, you know, the class is at a different time? And then online space that's not academics, for just social interaction through, maybe with some structure through community partners. Jamie from Kids Quest was talking about like this sort of models that they have, and we had someone from the YMCA chime in, Tina from the YMCA chime in with their sort of systems as well. We had a couple of new people. I'm also relatively new to the group, so it's been kind of fun to see sort of engagement.
Thank you for that. So gonna invite everybody to whip out your keyboards and open that chat box and just offer questions, thoughts, feedback. For the remote living group and all the groups, know that we will be taking back the feedback that's in the chat from your peers and providing that to you so you can work through that later. So just, we practiced before in critical response, any sort of like hypotheses or curiosities or excitement that you're having about what you just heard and you're seeing, now's the time to provide that in the chat. Just some feedback as far as like the efficacy of the use of the model here. Really appreciate one of the coaching feedbacks that we get is if you're, you know, in your home and you have a partner or your kids or a roommate and your partner says, oh, I'll do the dishes this one time. That's very different than saying, I'm going to make sure that the kitchen is always clean. Right. And so when we come up with work and action commitments, we want to be able to like own a space and own a space for long enough to know that that thing is always going to be solved for and not have to worry about it. So I really appreciate the level of the stuff that you've written out here, because it really says like there's a whole suite of issues in here and we don't know how to solve for them, but it's not like we're just going to give them the hotspots, problem solved, walk away. Right. We know that it's more complex than that. So we're really appreciating the level that you've got here. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next group, and I'm going to let Vicki pull them up. Health and well-being. Thank you, Vicki. Health and well-being, you're on. You're up.
The health and well-being group decided today that we do not have a focus and we need to regroup. And so our action items are, first, I'm going to get a sense from Peyton and make sure we have everyone included in the group. And second, we have scheduled an hour on Friday and someone's looking over the fish scale and we will start the work to do the fish scale to report something later.
Love it. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, group. I got the opportunity to jump in there and just loved the group dynamics and the open conversation you were all having. And I would offer that because your stretch is so large, it's really hard to get focused. And I know a lot of groups have really struggled with that. And I know particularly in this idea of wellness, because it's so complex, right? The cultural norms, all the things that play out in that. I was having a conversation like, if I don't do my meditation, if I don't drink my coffee, if I don't do my yoga, if I ate garlic 3 days ago, like there's so many things that make my sense of well-being just for me complicated. To scale that out and think about a group of people in East King County is wild. So really appreciate all the work that you all did and loved the strong action commitments and getting things on the calendar. Okay, next group. Food. I heard this group had lots of conversations, so I know someone's ready.
Tammy, are you taking this on? Okay.
I'm sorry, I just got dropped off. Can someone else? I don't even know what happened. All of a sudden it just dropped.
That's okay. Just begin at the beginning. Start with the fish scale. Tammy.
Oh, well, we went through the list of the fish scale, talking about how, you know, our universal population is 100% of the East King County needs food support, and our focus population being the bilingual ELL families. But then we also brought up the idea of the free and reduced lunch program families and how that's a much, much broader group of population that is changing by the week. And then we talked about how the core indicator is taking information like the mapping that we've done of the city of Bellevue and taking a look at where populations of people are and overlaying it with the number of agencies that are providing food and to that population. Some of the key factors is that we had a lot of discussion about was trust. Fear of being questioned by authority for whatever reason is that we have to have that trust be open. And then another key factor was the economics. I'm not really sure if I can talk too much about that, but definitely the communication that we are doing as far as using the word documentation being a deterrent. Yeah. we had quite a bit of information talking about that idea of trust and where our families and where our populations feel as though they can get food without being asked their address, without being asked for their name.
Thank you. So I'm going to invite folks to provide feedback, encouragement, curiosities, excitement in the chat. Can we scroll up just a little bit there, Vicki? One recommendation I make just for fidelity to the model here is that your universal population, just to get you a little bit more funneled in, might be people who are accessing food resources, right? Because it's a completely different suite of things if you're talking about people who, if you say people who need food support, one of the challenges might be they need it and they're not accessing it. That could be a key factor. Or you could just clearly address those who need it and aren't. And then underneath that could be the people who are English language learners or people who are bilingual. So just recognizing that, making sure your group is really crisp on the difference between the two, because that might lead you on completely different paths. Really appreciate that trust is one of your key factors, and I wonder how your core indicator might reflect that, because the core indicator right now can be solved in isolation without talking to people. Like, you can go count the number of organizations and then ask them to tell you how many people they're serving, but that doesn't address the emotional, the qualitative reporting of the people receiving those services. So I wonder how you might tweak that core indicator to incorporate some measurement around that issue, right? Or change your core indicator if that's going to be like, the main thing we need to tackle is why people don't trust us. How do you measure that trust? So that those agencies that you're talking about here in the current statement are helping measure, track, and show movement. So if you find a bright spot, one organization's like, they love us, we're great, they invite us over for dinner on the weekends, like, what are they doing, right? That's the purpose of being able to measure that. Okay, so we've got two more groups going to move on here. Funding.
Hi, it's Liz from Funding. So we had kind of a small group today, and we didn't get that far, but we did have a pretty good conversation. I'm hoping folks will jump in, because this was kind of like my perspective, but the idea to not get too hung up on counting, you know, what is 40% more funding, and kind of look at best practices to influence how funding decisions are made. An action commitment that I kind of started to make before we left our group was I had sent some framing questions around that were given to the state legislature to focus budget decisions on equity. And one thing that we're considering is, you know, kind of how do we influence the influencers, and perhaps send some framing questions to funders who might fund East King County agencies, and encourage them to root a lot of their decision making on equity. Group, what did I miss?
This is Sue. I think that's a good review of it, Liz. I think we're trying to work our way through to whether the role of the funding group is to actually figure out how you raise money for groups, or how you support decisions, like Liz said, on to make sure that they're based on equitable considerations. I think we're a little fuzzy right now. Would you say that, Liz?
Well, I mean, I think it can be yes and. I think, you know, ultimately what we talked about was we just kind of landed on our focus population because of who was in the group at the time. But I think, you know, like I said, in our small group, it doesn't really matter. I mean, we're bringing out issues of equity and inequity about the amount of funding for the East Side to meet the need, and in groups that aren't getting funded. Latinx is our focus population.
So thank you for that. And I'm going to stop you there before because I think in public spaces, we want to like defend our work. And so I'm going to cut you there because this is great. And I love that clearly your group has some synergy around recognizing that there are practices and ways of being and culture, as well as systems and policies around how funds get allocated in East King County, that you have focused on organizations that serve Latinx residents. And there's some consciousness or conversations around how do we know or measure or even be able to start to quantify who's getting money and who's not, and the group. And one thing I want to lift up that I'm hearing is a theme around decision making, right? And recognizing that is a very complex cultural thing. So inviting people to continue to provide feedback and curiosity in the chat box. And we've got our last, but not least, group housing coming up next. Vlette is hopping off right now from housing. I'm looking to see how we've got a couple people left from housing.
Yeah, this is Alex. I'm not sure. Could we put up, I think Vlette was sharing her screen on the.
Yeah, Vicky's got it up for you.
Kalika's yeah, she's got it up there. I'm so
great.
sorry, I'm gonna have to go, but thank you guys.
Thank you, thanks Vlette. Well, I'll jump in and then Will can, it's Vlette, Will and I. We were looking at our universal population of those at risk of eviction in, we said East King County at first, but we may need to maybe focus that to be a little, maybe it's Bellevue, I don't know, a certain, list a certain number of of jurisdictions. Our focus populations were refugee and immigrants and low-income people. And what we were going to use as indicators is, these are all quantitative, and Kalika suggested we would, do well to maybe consider a qualitative one, and really talking to people about, what some of the indicators are. But the ones we picked were people housed, number of evictions after the moratorium is lifted or not, and amount of rental assistance requested. And then the one revelation we didn't get to that we really benefited from Kalika's conversation with us is looking at the key factors, because as Kalika pointed out, we're at 3 different organizations, Bellevue LifeSpring, the City of Bellevue, and Imagine Housing. So we come from it from different perspectives, because Vlette really did know how to identify those most who need help, because she has this subset of people who are in the Imagine Housing sites. But I'll speak for me, and Will can jump in. In Bellevue, of course, we fund agencies to provide assistance to people in Bellevue. So we often don't know who needs the help most. Anyway, so Will, do you have any comments to jump in on? I don't know. Is Will still here?
I don't know that I see him.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Alex. So I just want to offer the purpose of this exercise. There's a couple things. When I spoke earlier about institutions, we have to know who we are in order to do the work, right? Like when you get a new job, they onboard you. They let you know the culture. They let you know the expectations. I use this example all the time. Nobody told you, you may not have pants on right now because I can only see you from the waist up. These are the jokes, guys. But ordinarily when you go to work, thank you for laughing, Linda. Ordinarily when you go to the work, we know that we come in fully clothed, right? Unless you work at the Y, you might be wearing a bathing suit. It's the idea of really having a clear understanding and recognizing, to Alex's point, that you're taking people who work from different organizations, different sectors, and having to create an identity together. This document helps you make sure that all the people that are in this room, whether or not they're here today and not next week, you have a clear identity of who you are as a collective, as a focus group. So when you go out into the world, you can say, I have a couple of people that I'm working with. We don't know how to solve this problem, but amongst us, we know that this is an issue. And you can take this piece of paper, this technical product, and have dialogue and say, is this really an issue? Like when I said, I might take that piece of paper and ask some kids, hey, do you know why kids don't go to the lunchroom? And they might say, oh yeah, we know, because we get bullied on the way. Oh, okay. And why do you think that is? So being able to take this product and have a shared identity of who you are collectively, right? Because nobody has to do this for you where your job is, because it's an institution, right? When I worked at the Y, I clearly knew what the Y did and what my charge was as an employee. We don't do that. We don't have that when we're working outside or cross-organization, cross-sector. That's the purpose of this tool. So thank you all so much for taking the time to develop this exercise, revisit this document, and continue to breathe into it, because the clearer this document gets, the clearer you are all on this document, the more effective you will be in leading change in our community. Thank you for your time. We will be sending out the meeting notes, and we'll see you next week.